Most urban legends follow a predictable formula. They begin as whispers at summer camps or sleepovers, ghost stories spun out of thin air to scare the local kids, with no actual record of them ever happening. The archival history of the Bunnyman looks very different. This story is rooted in two verified police reports filed in the fall of 1970, reports that remain in the county archives to this day. At the time, this part of Virginia was in a state of rapid transition. Quiet stretches of dense woods were quickly being carved out to make way for massive suburban developments. A documented suspect had emerged to aggressively patrol the literal boundary between the disappearing woods and the new residential tracts. Just after midnight on October 19th, an Air Force Academy cadet named Robert Bennett parked his car with his fiancée. They were sitting on a secluded, unlit stretch of Guinea Road, completely isolated by the heavy timber on either side. Without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness near their rear window. Both of the witnesses were absolutely certain about what he was wearing, a pale suit topped with two distinct long ears. Before Robert Bennett could react, the man swung a heavy hatchet with enough force to completely shatter the passenger side windshield. The attacker didn't try to rob them. Instead, he shouted that the young couple was trespassing on private property and that he had their license plate number. When Bennett sped away, the weapon stayed lodged inside the car. The local police took that hatchet into evidence, instantly turning a bizarre late-night encounter into a fully documented physical crime. Exactly 2 weeks later, on Halloween night, the focus shifted to a half-built house under construction, less than a mile away from the Bennett incident. A security guard named Paul Phillips was on patrol when he spotted a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home, wearing the exact same pale bunny costume. As Phillips approached, the man began methodically swinging a long-handled axe, driving the blade repeatedly into one of the wooden porch supports. The aggression had escalated. The man stared at the guard and delivered a clear warning. "All you people trespass around here. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Phillips retreated to his vehicle to retrieve his handgun. By the time he returned to the porch, the property was empty. The man had slipped back into the surrounding trees. These two events established a clear pattern. This was a calculated, armed local reacting violently to the sudden urbanization of the county, perfectly willing to threaten lives to protect his territory. The Fairfax County Police Department took both the hatchet attack and the Halloween threat seriously, launching an extensive investigation across the area. But they immediately hit a wall. No viable fingerprints, no purchase records, and the costume completely concealed the attacker's identity. Following the incident with the security guard, police never documented another verified sighting of the suspect. The trail went cold. With no new leads, authorities eventually took the only administrative step left to them and quietly marked the case inactive. That sudden halt in the investigation created a massive void. A violent, highly publicized attacker had successfully evaded capture, leaving the local population with a deep sense of unease and zero answers. Without a police resolution, the community stepped in to finish the story themselves. Within weeks, local papers reported the figure had been spotted over 50 times. Sightings breached county lines, spreading into Washington, D.C. and Maryland. This map shows the disconnect. While the public tracked dozens of encounters, law enforcement couldn't confirm a single new report. The details were shifting too. Families began reporting an axe-wielding rabbit in residential neighborhoods, miles away from Guinea Road, entirely detached from the original construction sites. The specific details of the crime scenes were soon eclipsed by a viral phenomenon that spread regardless of the evidence. By 1973, a University of Maryland researcher studying the panic documented exactly 54 distinct variations of the lore actively circulating. Those 54 versions introduced motives, names, and histories that never existed in any official county record. Because the actual suspect was never caught, the community claimed his identity as a blank canvas, filling it with whatever frightened them most. The narrative shifted away from a territorial local defending his property. The news stories replaced smashed windshields with detailed accounts of outright carnage. The documented facts of the man on Guinea Road ended quietly in 1970, but the blood-soaked monster the public built to replace him was only just getting started. The official police reports from the fall of 1970 detailed two bizarre but bloodless encounters. Yet, as the story passed from person to person into the decades that followed, it acquired something the historical record never had: a body count. By the 1980s, local teenagers were trading versions of the legend that escalated into gruesome territory. The man in the suit became a slasher, with stories now demanding mutilated victims hanging from trees in the deep woods. As the internet arrived, the myth codified. In 1999, a widely circulated online post finally gave the killer a name and a history, claiming the Bunnyman was an escaped convict named Douglas Griffin. According to this timeline, Griffin slipped into the wilderness following a horrific prison transport crash in 1904. To survive, he supposedly lived in the brush, sustaining himself entirely on half-eaten rabbits. The story ended with a violent climax. Before authorities could bring him in, Griffin was allegedly struck and killed by a speeding oncoming freight train. It is a chilling origin story, but according to Fairfax County's own historical archives, there is no historical record of a Douglas Griffin, and no newspaper or court document mentions a prison transport crash in 1904. Without hard facts to anchor the story, collective imagination took over. The community built a detailed, highly specific history out of thin air to satisfy the need for a satisfying monster. For years, librarians could only tell curious visitors that the story's origins were a mystery. Then, county historian archivist Brian Conley decided to conduct a formal investigation, spending nearly a decade combing through thousands of physical documents. He systematically checked local court records and scrolled through countless rolls of newspaper microfiche, looking for evidence to corroborate the legend. He found nothing. There was no asylum near Clifton. The transport crash did not exist. Douglas Griffin was a ghost. What Conley eventually uncovered in his 2002 research was buried deep in actual police files. He found two documented encounters from the fall of 1970. The official reports described a real man wearing a bunny costume and wielding a real hatchet. There were no victims, there was no bloodshed. The verified historical record reveals a truth that is actually more unsettling for its simplicity, a reality lacking the tidy narrative arc of the ghost stories we built to cover it up. Perhaps the strangest twist in the evolution of this story involves its most famous landmark, the Colchester Overpass, known locally as Bunnyman Bridge. Generations of thrill-seeking teenagers have driven out to this exact spot, entirely convinced it is the site of the original attacks, or the place where the killer met his end. Conley's research proved that neither of the two verified 1970 incidents occurred anywhere near this stone structure. The police reports clearly placed both encounters on Guinea Road. At the time, that area was an active, rapidly expanding residential construction zone. A newly built suburban subdivision filled with half-finished houses and active construction crews provides a poor atmosphere for a horror story. The Colchester Overpass, built in 1906, sat isolated in the woods. It looked the part. Over time, local lore absorbed the bridge into the narrative because it looked exactly like a horror set should. The community moved the location of the story to a better setting. The real backdrop was replaced because it didn't feel scary enough to support the weight of the myth. Today, the town of Clifton has fully leaned into this borrowed fame. You can buy Bunnyman merchandise. Every October, the bridge draws a steady stream of curious visitors and serves as the inspiration for local seasonal haunted attractions. But strip away the merchandise and the ghost tours, and you are left with a very quiet, unresolved reality. This timeline maps out the actual age of the suspect. If the man who wore the costume and swung the hatchet in 1970 was 20 years old at the time, he would be in his mid-70s today. He was never caught. The police never identified him, and he simply walked away into the Virginia suburbs, keeping his identity a complete mystery. For over 50 years, people poured their energy into inventing a dead slasher to avoid the reality of a live, unhinged man who committed two real crimes and then simply vanished. The true horror lies in that unsolved 1970 police file, the bizarre, unresolved reality that we tried to obscure with 50 years of fiction.